Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt TV. My name's Stefan Minkowski and I'm once again joined by my colleagues Ben and Ewan. And it is the depths of February, which also means Champions League football, Europa League football, UEFA Conference League football is back, thankfully keeping our midweeks entertained. And one of the most intriguing things about European football this season is that there's going to be a big shake-up next year, which actually means two of Europe's top five leagues will be getting a fifth place in the Champions League next year. It's the kind of subplot to a lot of what's going on, particularly in the Champions League. And because Transfermarkt has answers to all of your football questions, in particular Ewan Robertson has answers to all your football questions, he done an excellent article on which nations, or rather which leagues are winning, or in the lead rather, in that race for the fifth Champions League spot. Ewan, before we kind of talk about which clubs, which nations, and who it's going to affect next season, why don't you just run through for our viewers how this race is, how it works to begin with, and how it's playing out so far?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as simplistic as possible because these things can be very confusing at times. Essentially, as you mentioned, Stefan, there's major reconstruction in the Champions League next season, so it's going to extend to 36 teams. So with that, there's 4 additional places up for grabs. 2 of those slots will be handed to the clubs with the highest UEFA coefficients who miss out on qualification, and the other 2, what we're touching on today, will go to essentially 2 leagues who've accumulated the best coefficient this season. How that's worked out is, all the points accumulated by a nation's clubs in European competition this season will be divided by the number of competing teams. And then also you get the totals, which we'll go and talk about how it stands at the moment. Coefficient points are awarded based on results, so you get 2 points for a win, 1 for a draw, and obviously 0 for a defeat. And they actually stay the same across all competitions, so it's equally weighted from the Champions League down to the Conference League, which is quite an interesting factor, and it will be really important in working out what nation does get that extra Champions League place.
Yeah, absolutely. As Ewan's article points out, as things currently stand ahead of this week's European football, Serie A is actually in front right now with an average of 14.71 coefficient points. Then it's the Bundesliga, then the Premier League. They're more or less neck and neck. And then you have the Liga and Ligue 1. And Ben, one of the kind of key things that Ewan pointed out there, which I think a lot of football fans don't realise, is that the coefficient points you pick up in the Europa League and the Conference League also have equal weighting to the Champions League. So this isn't just a conversation about which team's going to win the Champions League. As things currently stand, as Ewan's article points out, there's still 7 Italian clubs in European competition this season, 6 from Germany, 6 from England, and 6 from Spain. When you kind of look at who's left in all those competitions, which nations do you think are probably best suited to pick up those coefficient points this season?
I think you can't look further than England and the Premier League teams, to be honest. I think if you look at the Champions League, Manchester City, the holders are naturally going to be favourites there. You might also expect Arsenal to go fairly far in that competition. Obviously, they are the only 2 English sides in the Champions League still. Going down to the Europa League, Liverpool are going to be favourites. Jurgen Klopp's last season, they'd love to see him out with the European trophy. So that's another great opportunity for an English team. And even Brighton, I think they're going to take that seriously under Roberto De Zerbi. And then even dropping down to the Conference League, I think you have to consider Aston Villa as the favourites for that competition, certainly given Unai Emery's record in Europe. He's going to be a priority for Aston Villa going into the second half of the season. They have had some injuries, losing Boubacar Kamara for the rest of the season, and obviously they're going to have to concentrate on the league as well to try and get into the Champions League for next season. But I see them as having a good opportunity. So I think England are in a great place to get that 5th Champions League spot for next season.
Yeah, there are obviously quite a lot of clubs from other leagues still in there. Germany in particular still have quite a lot, but it remains to be seen how many of them will get through this round, particularly Bayern Munich, who are actually behind after their first leg against Lazio. But we talk about those coefficient points in other competitions kind of stacking up just as equally as the Champions League. And we've obviously seen Spain over the last maybe decade kind of keep up with other leagues because of those kind of teams, like 5th or 6th best teams in Europe, in Spain winning the Europa League and things like that, whereas maybe English or German clubs are maybe the ones really competing for the Champions League. But then, of course, we have someone like West Ham who won the Conference League recently as well. So there's a lot of depth to it, but if I'm not mistaken, from what I read from your article, one nation that probably looks nailed on to get one of those fifth Champions League spots is England. And if you actually look at the Premier League table as it stands right now, and the clubs who are competing for potential, or what would have been traditionally a top four finish, an extra Champions League spot actually adds a whole different dynamic to that race for Champions League places next season.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the top four race now becomes the top five race this season if England, as expected, get that extra place, which, it brings in like a massive incentive to especially Manchester United, Tottenham and Aston Villa, the three clubs really who are battling for that fourth place. I think Liverpool, Man City and Arsenal will be the top three, so it makes it fascinating because you've also got Aston Villa, the only one of those three clubs who are still in European competition. So it could go further down the line where they're battling for top four, top five, also still in the Conference League. So it'll be fascinating to see what happens with them as well. You'd think England would be nailed on for one of those places, as Ben mentioned, in the Champions League, Europa League, and the Conference League. English clubs will be favourites to probably win all three of those at the moment with the bookmakers. And it's really going to become a shootout, I think, between Italy and Germany for that other place alongside England. I think Spain are probably too far away now. They were obviously hamstrung a little bit by the fact that Osasuna, they went out in the qualifying stages to get into Europe this season, so obviously didn't pick up any more points. That was a major blow to them. But it'll be fascinating to see what happens as well, because it's a big factor now in the Premier League season. That top four race becomes the top five race, and two clubs will be vying to get into it.
Yeah. Ben, just before we finish up, but just looking at that league table, the thing that really interests me is that, of course, you've got the big hitters. You've got Villa, Tottenham and Man United there pushing for that fifth place, but you've got Brighton with De Zerbi, Newcastle with Eddie Howe, West Ham with David Moyes, and Chelsea with Pochettino. And for one reason or another, either the clubs decide to stick with a manager under pressure, or a manager who's maybe linked with another club could decide to stay. If one of those clubs kind of sneaks into that fifth place, we could be in a position where, a Pochettino keeps his job at Chelsea because a Man City or a Liverpool have won a European trophy and got that extra Champions League spot for them.
Yeah, well, like you said, it provides a massive incentive. And for a long time, teams in that sort of position now, we're getting to that stage where they've got nothing to play for. And it adds to that because it's going to take a lot for the likes of Brighton, Chelsea, Newcastle, West Ham. They'd have to have a real late push to get into that top five. But the fact it could be a top five, does give them something to play for, an incentive that if they can get some results and get a run together, some other teams drop points, there is a late chance for them. So it certainly makes it more interesting going into the business end of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to let everyone know, Ewan will be updating that piece on the Transfermarkt website for the rest of the season. So if you are interested in knowing who's going to be, or who's in the pole position for those fifth Champions League spots, either at the end of this week, or obviously when the Champions League and Europa League and Conference League return for the following round, make sure to check Transfermarkt for all that data, all that updated news. And until next time, make sure to like and subscribe to this video, and we'll speak to you soon.